Hey everybody, it's Drew from 198 Methods. We're going to do a quick update video because three important things all happened last Thursday, and we're going to give you the update in one big news dump quickly so that you can get on with your weekend and get on with the work that needs to happen next on these. So the three things that all happened on Thursday are the Senate Energy Committee's hearing on the Biden administration LNG pause. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments on the case about the 14th Amendment and barring Trump from the ballot because of the insurrection on January 6, 2021. And then later in the day, the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, released their docket for their February meeting, which is next week on February 15th. And that also has to do with LNG exports. So just taking them chronologically, thanks to all of you who signed our petition telling Joe Manchin and other members of Congress to keep their dirty hands off Biden's LNG pause. We did deliver all of those signatures in time for the hearing on Thursday morning. Also at that hearing, a bunch of protesters spoke up out of turn. They were not official witnesses, but they stood up to sing and chant and mostly to tell Joe Manchin the same message you had, which is to keep his dirty hands off the LNG pause and not to take any actions that would reverse or require the Department of Energy to start issuing new energy export licenses for liquefied natural gas, LNG. So there was a protest in the hearing room. 14 folks were arrested. They've all since been released and are fine. But there was an in-room protest as well as us sending in all of our comments and signatures from outside of the hearing room, for those of you who couldn't be in DC that morning, and all with a unified message that Joe Manchin and other members of Congress who are bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry should not meddle in the LNG pause. It is, after all, only a temporary pause, and only so long as DOE can reevaluate the criteria to determine whether or not LNG exports are in the public interest, in the national interest. And so there's really no reason for them to meddle in it, but they were spouting a lot of lies and misinformation at the hearing, asking a lot of misguided questions. And so we expect that this fight will go on and that there will be more actions we'll need to take together next week and over the next couple of weeks to make sure that Joe Manchin and people like him, Senator Barrasso, the ranking Republican member on that committee as well, is another who may try and offer amendments to must-pass spending bills or things like that to try and jam through approvals of LNG exports, even though Biden has taken this step to pause the export licenses for the time being. So a good action, a good series of actions on Thursday morning. Thanks to everybody who showed up in the hearing room. Thanks to everybody who signed petitions and sent things in to the U.S. Senate in time for that hearing. And stay tuned because there'll be more on that coming up in the next week. At about the same time that hearing was happening, or maybe sort of wrapping up towards the end of the Senate Energy Committee hearing, the Supreme Court just down the road, just down the block, was hearing oral arguments. This is the Colorado case which would bar Trump from the primary ballot in their state because of his involvement in and really leadership of the insurrection and the attempt to overturn the election in 2020 that happened on January 6, 2021. This has been a campaign of ours since January 6, 2021. We have been pushing to ban people who engaged in the insurrection from higher office, and Trump in particular, as the leader of what we call the fossil fuel fascist party, which seeks to marry fossil fuel industry money with the political power and violence of a fascist movement that would take power by any means and throw out election results. The bad news there is this was only arguments. The Supreme Court hasn't ruled yet. We'll have to wait a couple weeks for that. But everybody who listened to the arguments and what the justices were saying in the room, and anybody who's looked at the recent history of this 6-member conservative majority, 3 of whom were appointed by Donald Trump anyway, nobody much expects them to uphold the Colorado ruling. The expectation is that they will probably strike down Colorado and say that Trump can and must be allowed to stand for re-election despite Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. We don't know exactly how they'll square that logically. It seems pretty clear. The amendment is very clear. Section 3 says if you have engaged in insurrection against the country, you cannot be an elected officer of the country. We don't know how the Supreme Court will find their way around that, but it seemed like that's where they were going, at least, again, that 6-member conservative majority, which has made a lot of bad decisions in the last couple of months and years. And then the third thing that happened also on Thursday that may seem less important than a Supreme Court case and whether or not Donald Trump can stay on the ballot, the Senate Energy Committee and the future of LNG export pause, but is still quite important, especially to our next week or two of work, is that the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's monthly meeting agenda came out. One special note that this month's meeting in honor of Black History Month is being held at Howard Law School, just a little ways away from the usual FERC building, and that it will be the first FERC meeting since the LNG export pause went into place. And we told you a week or two ago when the pause was first announced that we would have to wait and see how other places like CP2, but other facilities that were farther back or farther ahead in the permitting process, how they would respond to the LNG export pause. For example, would they say, we give up and we're no longer going to apply for a permit from FERC? Or would they say, no, we think that DOE is eventually going to lift their pause and allow LNG exports again, and so proceed with their permitting at FERC. And on this month's agenda are two big gas projects, but the one in particular we're focused on is called Driftwood LNG. It's another LNG export terminal just a little distance away from where CP2 was proposed to be built in Louisiana. So they're both Louisiana LNG export terminals. CP2 is not on the agenda still, so we continue to think and hope that CP2 is going to be sort of killed by this pause. But Driftwood LNG, which is a smaller but nearby and otherwise very similar LNG export facility, is moving ahead. And it does look like, again, all we have is the sunshine notice that it's on the docket for FERC next week on February 15th. But usually when a project is on their agenda like that, it means that they're going to approve the FERC permit for Driftwood LNG. Driftwood already has an export permit from DOE, so they wouldn't be covered by the pause. But the project has been in rocky financial straits, and so there's been some question of whether Driftwood LNG would essentially pack it in, like we've been saying about CP2, that they would look at the pause on LNG export licenses and not having their FERC permit yet, and would say, you know what, this isn't going to happen. We will withdraw our application, and we are no longer going to try and build an LNG export terminal. They may still not go through with it. They may not get the financing to build Driftwood LNG, but it does look like they're at least going to ask for and get their permit from FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And that's why we've been saying we can't take our eyes off FERC, even though we have this pause at DOE that's buying us some time and delaying some of the projects that were in the queue for LNG export. There's a whole lot of projects that had already been approved. We can't ignore those. And there's a whole bunch of projects that were at different places than CP2 in the permitting process, like Driftwood. And if those projects continue to move forward, and especially if FERC continues to grant them approval after approval, permit after permit to continue forward with it, that will be a worrying sign that the rest of the Biden administration hasn't gotten the memo, as it were, and is going to proceed full speed ahead with a massive build out of fossil fuel exports, which will, again, we've been saying this for several months now, but that will completely tank Biden's ability to meet his own climate commitments. What he said he wants to do is cut global warming pollution in this country 50% by 2030 and to net zero by 2050. And he simply can't do it if all of these export terminals and all of these new gas infrastructure projects are built. And if FERC doesn't apply the brakes ever to any of the gas build out, both domestic and international export versions of it, then we will simply blow right past those global climate change targets that the Biden administration has set. So bad news in terms of the agenda. It doesn't look like FERC is making any changes, but we'll have some more actions for you to take next week, and the fight will go on at FERC to convince them to make the same change in policy that DOE is making temporarily with this pause, which is to say to reevaluate the climate and community impacts of gas projects. We believe if you add up all of the actual impacts, if you look at that fairly and honestly, that FERC would find that none of those projects are in the public interest. They would never have approved the Mountain Valley Pipeline. They would never have approved any of these other LNG export terminals. Seguro Pipeline is another one that's on the docket for the next FERC meeting. So all those things happened on Thursday. Senate Energy Committee hearing, oral arguments at the Supreme Court, and the FERC meeting agenda coming out. So we bundled them all together for one big update, and then we'll write a couple of posts over the next 2 days so you can kind of digest and dig into the links and more video clips from all that. All right, for everybody at 198 Methods, I'm Drew. Have a great weekend.